Okay, so welcome to today's PSU Transportation Seminar. My name is Leming Wang, and I will be introducing and moderating today's seminar. Our PSU Transportation Seminar has been a tradition since the year 2000. These seminars are once again being held live on Portland State University's urban campus, located on the ancestral homelands of the Monoma, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, and Walala bands of the Chinook, the Tualatin, Kalapuya, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River. It is important to acknowledge that we are here because of the sacrifices forced on the indigenous ancestors of this place. Remember these communities and to honor their legacy, lives, and destinies. Today, we are pleased to have Alex Xiaosheng Li to present on transportation planning in an aging society. Alex Li is a visiting assistant professor in the School of Planning, Public Policy, and Management at University of Oregon. Prior to joining UO, he was an adjunct lecturer and postdoctoral researcher at the University of California, Riverside. His research interests broadly cover transportation equity issues, interactions of land use and transportation, urban planning for an aging society, and local sustainability actions and governance. His recent research projects examine local climate actions in inland Southern California, the role of built environment in traffic stop decisions, and equitable transit-oriented development. His recent peer-reviewed publication appeared in major transportation, planning, and social policy journals, including Journal of American Planning Association, Journal of Planning Literature, Transportation Research Part A, Transportation Journal of Aging and Social Policy. He holds a PhD in city and regional planning from the University of Pennsylvania and obtained his master's and bachelor's degree from Peking University, China. Here's a preview of our upcoming seminars. And of course, you will find those on our website as well. As an overview of today's seminar, you can expect our speakers to present for about 40 minutes, followed by a Q&A. I think that's it. With that, I will give the phone to Alex.
Thank you. Great. Nice to see everybody here. I'm Alex, and drive from Eugene this morning, not so far. And today I will talk about transportation planning in aging society. So the presentation is based on my research, I think, in the past 4 or 5 years. So I mainly focus on transportation implications for the disadvantaged older people. And in this context, older people is considered one of them. So for today's presentation, I will just present very briefly about the background, why I go to this area to look at the transportation service for the older people, and also to talk about the policies for the older people in the United States. And for the second part, I will get a high-level overview of my 3 empirical research in this field. Those are just policy-driven, that is driven by policies in part 1, really the research gap and the policy gaps as well. And for the final part, I will talk about the policy and research implications in this field. Okay, so You can tell from my appearance, right? I come from a traditional Chinese family. And when I was born, we have 4 generations. So it's very natural for me to think about the interactions with the older people. So my grandpa's mother lives with us about when I was 10. So, we have a really big family. And every time I think about the health disparities about the old people, and long story short, later I became interested in the urban planning, urban structure, transportation. I think about how our communities and cities could help the old people to age healthily and successfully. So when I moved to the United States, so my second home was with an American older woman, and she lives alone and supports international students and teach English, and also lives with a lot of international students. So we talk a lot about the culture differences in terms of what the Americans want, what Chinese want when they get older, and also the transportation and housing solutions. So for me, I really want to bring in those intercultural experiences and think about what's the future solutions for the older Americans, and then extend that to the global context and think about what should we do. When we come to the United States context, you might not notice that yet, but the United States, like many European countries and other Western countries, are becoming aging really rapidly. And in 2020, about 17% of Americans aged 65 and over. So one of the primary reasons there is the baby boomers who were born between 1946 and 1964, they are just entering 65 within 1 decade. So the population is changing so fast. And when we look at where they live from an urban planning perspective, the increase really happened in the low density suburban and rural areas. And this is something we really need to care about. And for the older people, the transportation issues are still over there when they just have a limited driving ability that just enter a stage we call driving cessation. That when that happens, they totally lost the ability to drive, they stop driving. But for many others, they have limited ability to drive as well. For example, to have limited ability to drive at evenings, etc. So considering the geography context of most of the US communities, we know that is the problem, right? Unfortunately, most of our neighborhoods and transportation system do not provide the older people with enough alternative transportation modes. So the gerontologists might say today, we might can take advantage of the technology, for example, Amazon, Uber, or something like that, but it's not easy. And we know the age-based digital divide, and there are many research talking about that, though there are some support and education programs for the older people, still it is so hard. 3 decades ago, Transportation Research Board did a research that is about old people and think about what should we do for the old people 3 decades later. So what they ended up with the conclusion is that the old persons of 2020 will have a high expectation about driving. We know that is true, right? But they are very optimistic that there is every reason to believe that these expectations will come true. We know that it's not, right? When it comes to the policies, the transportation programs for the older people are mainly provided by 2 federal agencies. That is the Department of Health and Human Services, that from the social service perspective. So they regard transportation policies as the social policies, right? So they care about the destinations and also the services they provide. For example, go to the healthcare facilities and the healthy food, something like that. And when they go to the eligibility of those programs is really based on the social attributes of the older people. For example, age, veteran status, medical conditions is something that they care about the social programs. And the DOT is another set of the policies and programs there. And what they focus on is very clear, right? Like what we see in the last 3 decades is make the older people to drive longer on the road and try to fix that by the highway design, engineering, and also driver safety education. And they also provide the alternative travel modes. It's mainly paratransit and mainly focuses on the urban areas as well. So we can see that the programs for older people are fragmented, right? So it is provided by 2 different agencies. They have different goals, but overall, there are still a lot of limitations of these programs. So first, it is still very auto-dependent, right? So just want the old people to drive longer on the road, focusing on the driving ability, but we know many of the old people, they will lose the driving abilities. And then as for the alternative travel modes, especially the paratransit, has been critiqued a lot by the existing scholar and literature already. That is, they are very expensive, not very flexible, and also there is a lack of services in the rural and suburban areas. We will talk more when it comes to the solutions in the end. And when it comes to the digital divide, that is a serious issue that we might have the technology to solve that, but based on the current policies, DOT have recognized that, but it is just a very recent effort in that area. So based on that, we know that compared to the rapid growth of the old people, we really have a lack of knowledge about what we should do and what we should progress in those areas. So based on the lack of knowledge, what I do is that my research is mainly focused, motivated by 2 paradigm shifts in different disciplines. The first is from public health and gerontology. There is a paradigm shift from disengagement theory to successful aging. That is in the middle of 20th century, the gerontologists and sociologists really tend to think when the old people become older, they will get excluded from the society as a result of the aging process. But in the 1980s and the 90s, the scholars tend to think, let's think about that from an alternative perspective. Maybe we can do something more positively to change the status quo, do some health interventions, community interventions like that. But in these paradigm shifts, the transportation needs of the old people are not talked too much. And another thing you might be very familiar with in transportation is that we have seen a paradigm from the mobility-based to accessibility-based. That is from the total efficiency of the whole transportation system to the multimodal system that evaluates how many opportunities you can get within a reasonable threshold. So that is the major paradigm shift in terms of the practice and scholarship in the last 2 or 3 decades also in transportation. But in these paradigm shifts, there are some scholars have done some work, but overall, the needs of the older people compared to other disadvantaged groups. So for example, the low-income commuters, immigrants are overlooked to a large extent. So what I really focus on is 3 very fundamental questions. The first one is just a question the basis of the report that is 3 decades ago, that is older people today really driving more. So I will give more context to why I see that. And speaking of that, we also see that older people, there is an increasing diversity among them. And it is very important to think about the most disadvantaged groups, right? So we cannot just think about the average. We know on average, the older people are wealthier, healthier, right? But from considering the large number of the baby boomers, we know that the most disadvantaged groups are also the number is increasing so fast. And we can see a lot in our cities, right? So for example, the people who experience homelessness these days, right? A lot of them are older people, and we need to think about that. And question C really go to the solutions. And what I think is that what's the role of technology in mitigating the transportation inequities? This is also very important to think about new solutions for the old people. So based on my training and also my readings, that is my experience is mainly on the left side, that is transportation planning and policy. So previously, I did some work in China and the United States, mainly focused on the interaction of transportation and land use, like transit-oriented development, and also the transportation policies for the disadvantaged people. And what I noticed is that the literature there, for example, the generational differences in travel, vehicle ownership over the left course, ICT and travel, technology and travel was the relationship there, mainly focused on the young people, like us, right? So millennials, Generation Z, how does, for example, iPhone change how you travel, like that? But this just largely overlook the life courses for the older people. And that is a lack of evidence in our literature. But in gerontology and public health, there are a lot of work discussing that, for example, driving cessation, life events, and also technology usage among older people. What is the technology acceptance or the attitudes like that? That is very important to understand in this context. So my work is really to combine them together and think about how the old people's behavior just contribute to the literature on the left, that is in the transportation literature. So the first study examines the generational differences in vehicle travel. So I just bring about the most significant findings. If you want to find more, you can find in this paper published in Transportation. So as I said before, that is most of the older people today are the baby boomers, and I question, are the baby boomers really driving more than previous generations? We see a lot in the social media, right? That is the old people, they are really the car lovers. They really drive the automobile industry or something like that. That's just one side of the story. So that is true that the older people really depend more on the vehicles. They have delayed retirement overall. That is overall again. And also there are a number of them growing in the suburbs and rural areas that we see that a lot of them age in place, right? But there are some facts that just question this observation as well. First is that, as I said before, there are also the number of the old people, they have the medical conditions, they are growing. So we would expect for these groups of people, the driving cessation, limited driving ability are still there, right? So when they develop the medical conditions, they will have the adverse travel outcomes. And also, that is information communications technology, though the benefit less from that, we can see that many of them exposed to the environment, their travel behavior also influenced by the technology. And finally, is that we want to look more at the disadvantaged older people. Sometimes they don't drive is not because they don't like drive, it's because they don't have the capacity to drive anymore, right? So those kind of things we need to keep in mind. So for my research, the methods and the motivation mainly come from the travel behavior of the millennials. And we can see a lot of social media headlines about today's millennials. How do they differ from the previous generation, right? Especially in the 2010s. And that is the argument in the United States, in Europe, about peak car. There are many arguments for that. For example, they use the iPhone and laptop more, right? So that takes a lot of their time. Also, it's during the economic recession. And also, there are the life changes. That is, they move to the downtowns. But after 2010, there are also some scholars that find the opposite. That is, after the economic recession, many millennials just choose to get married, have children, and again, that's the trend of the last generation, move to the suburbs and have cars. So what I think is that the older people in those 2 decades also experienced something similarly, right, in many ways. And what I think is to just examine how does those changes have changed their travel behavior. So, for example, if there is the technology usage, if there is the delayed retirement, maybe we have the reason to believe their VMT is kind of in the air, right? So we don't really know the direction there. So the data for the study comes from the National Household Travel Survey, 2001 and 2017. So I think for the audience, I don't have to explain more about NHTS, right? So and what I selected is those aged 56 to 71. So that was inspired by the research of the millennials. Why I choose those age group is because in 2001 data for this age group, they are all the silent generation. That is the baby boomers past generation who was born from 1928 to 1945, right? So, and then the baby boomers is 46 to 64. And in 2017, all of them are the baby boomers. So if I control this age group, and what the year denotes is a combination of the generation difference as well as the year difference between 2001 and 2017. So simply put, I conducted a lot of models. I will not detail that on the personal vehicle miles traveled and the number of the vehicle trips. And the year dummy here just denotes, as what I said, a combination of those effects and how that influence the older people's travel behavior. And the interaction terms, I also included them, but I will just not detail in this presentation. What I found is that from 2001 to 2017, you can see the difference of the colors there. And the left-hand side just to show the changes of the personal vehicle miles traveled, that is personal VMT. And the right-hand side just shows the changes of the number of trips. So what's shown here is that for the vehicle miles traveled, as you can see, if we consider all the trips, that is, it actually increased by 1.7 miles approximately. But when it comes to non-work vehicle miles traveled, that's only 0.6. So what's the rest of them? What's the rest of the vehicle miles traveled in the increase? That's the commuting, right? So basically what that means is that it's probably that is the increase is not due to the older people travel more for the social, it's because they just stay in the labor market longer, so on average. And when we see the vehicle trips, that's the similar conclusion, that is the vehicle trips just declined by 0.4, and the non-work trips 0.3, so almost the same, and the commuting does not change so much, right? But the next thing is that that's only the overall numbers. But when it comes to, there are a lot of differences within the generations and across generations, right? I want to just control them and get them to the regression models. But now what I find is that if you remember the year dummy, what the year dummy denotes is that all the decline. That is, if we just don't think about the socioeconomic attributes among the older people, right? We just think about the baby boomers is a different generation. It's not that different when it comes to 56 to 71, right? So that might inform we need to reconsider a lot of policies for today, right? Do we need more highway because of the older people just stay in the labor market longer or something like that? And as I said before, that is the big picture, and we really need to see more about the disadvantaged older people because they are on the rise as well. So this is another paper that is also published on transportation, and it uses a new data set to understand the vehicle ownership change over the life course for the older people. Why the ownership for older people is important. So I think when we think about those who do not have cars, right? Again, all the discussions just come to millennials, immigrants, right? Like that. But I don't think many transportation scholars look into how the vehicle ownership change over the life course. So if we basically just pull over the data from NHTS that is based on the household head age, that is, as the age increase over time, more and more older people will not have car, live in the zero car household. So this triangle just shows that when we zoom into those living alone, aged 55 and over, 11% of them, that is 1 out of 9 of the households, do not have a car. That is a really high number, right? 11%. And what's surprising, most surprising to me, is that 7% of them live in the non-urban areas, suburban areas, towns, secondary cities, etc. Based on the past literature, there are a lot of factors related to that, and mainly there is life cycle events, the household characteristics, and built environment. But what's most interesting and what that does not talk too much in the literature is about life cycle events related to the older people as well as the built environment. That is where you live, how that influenced your vehicle ownership decisions. So for the outcome variable, I examine is that for those who have one car in the baseline, that is one car, whether they will still have this car in the next wave. So if they did not have this car 2 years later, that means basically if they don't relocate to another position, is that it's very likely they still need a car, but they don't have that anymore, right? So that's a disadvantage position. So this is a data set that is not used too much in transportation. To my knowledge, this is the first time to use to understand vehicle ownership among the older people using this data set. That is the panel study of income dynamics, PSID, conducted by University of Michigan. They just cover nearly 10,000 families and just examine their social changes over the life course. There are one question asked there about the vehicle ownership, and it also contains a confidential data on request, includes the census tract where the old people lives over the 5 decades. Only several papers have used this data before. And what I do is that I selected the data from 2001 to 2017 because that's the years that contain the data for vehicle ownership. And I selected the households headed by 55 and older without relocation. And that's about 11,000 household year observations. But I don't use all of the samples. What I use, as I said before, is those who have 1 car in the baseline. That is around 30% of the observations. And I examine what factors are related to their decision, not decision, but the outcome that is giving up the only car. That is about 8% of them. That is a large number as well that experienced this. So that is based on the panel studies. I just based on the vehicle ownership as well as the socioeconomic attributes of different waves, and just calculate the ownership change as well as the life cycle events, right? And then what I did is to combine the public data, the confidential data, and just to combine the external built environment attributes as well, based on the census tract identifier, and then use the binary logistic regression, really easy, right? To examine whether the household will become zero vehicle household or not. In the aging and transportation research, one important variable is gender. So what I also did is that I just selected the samples that is who kept living alone, or they became living alone across the 2 years and examine the gender disparities in the decisions. What I find is that this is a reference line of 1, and any number larger than 1, as you know, is the factors that related to the positive relationship between giving up the only car. And we can see that the loss of a partner, this is a really disruptive event over the life course for the older people, and also those headed by the Hispanics. For the income, that is not that is intuitive. That is, the wealthier you are, the less likely you will give up the only car. For the age, that is only the intensity of the number is very small. That implies when just controlling for all other variables, age itself is not that important, right? So because older people, depending on their social status, they experience the life cycle events in different age, right? When it comes to the built environment, that is disappointing to the urban planners, but that is a finding. None of the built environment variables are significant. So what that means is that if you live in the suburban and rural areas, you have the equal possibility of losing the only car, controlling for all the other variables. So that is something the transportation planners really need to consider that. When it comes to gender, that is women compared to men, no matter is living alone or becoming living alone, are more possible to become the zero vehicle households. That means women have more disadvantages when they get widowed in terms of the vehicle ownership. So it is a thing for us to think about the social policy related to the economic outcomes of today, what we have, right? So we know that in some cities in the United States, there is nonprofit agencies usually work with the low-income families and provide them with the cars to help them to connect to the job opportunities. But those opportunities really naturally exclude a lot of the older people, right? So this is the thing for us to think about who need more additional support, right? Like what I said before in terms of the life cycle stage, as well as if they just do not have the car anymore. And for example, if they are widowed and have the medical conditions, what can we do, right? So the alternative transportation modes is also something we need to consider about. So here come to the final question is that what can we do? So we think that technology is promising, but what's the real relationship between the mobility and technology usage? So I did a survey to examine the relationship among them, and the results have been published on TRA this year. So there are two questions about the ICT and travel, I think, in the aging studies that are not explored before. The first one is that does ICT and travel, what's the relationship between the older people? We know a lot for the general population and the young people in particular, but for older people, we do not really know that. And second is from an equity perspective, and it is something we need to consider the transportation equity in the digital era. That is, for those who really have fewer trips, out of home trips, do they also use technology less? If this is the case, that is, these people have the double disadvantages in the digital era. So I really want to explore those factors. So the model for this, as you can tell, it is a structural equation model, right? And based on the model, that is, the ICT usage, daily travel, they are endogenous. That is, ICT can influence travel, and on the other side, travel can influence people's decision of using technology as well. And many factors, that is demographic, socioeconomic, built environment, all of them are related to the two decisions. And also based on the literature in other disciplines, I also considered the attitudes and perceptions about ICT, as well as the residential and travel preferences. And after that, the key question is that that's part of my dissertation, right? If I want to graduate, I have to finish the survey during the pandemic. So what I did is that I did an online survey that is about 2,500 people. I did that within 2 months and gave $10,000 to Qualtrics. And it is a recall survey. What I did is to ask the older people to recall what they did in February 2020. So for a bunch of ICT and transportation activities. But the thing is that I really want to get those who are disadvantaged in that. Online survey, largely that's not possible, right? But I did my best to do that. Is that first I did a quota sampling, that is I see what's the characteristics of the American Community Survey for the older people, and think about how to match my samples to the table. So I just give the table to Qualtrics. And then they just come back and forth to me every 2 weeks and say, hey, Alex, we like this group, we like that group. And so they worked hard to target on the specific groups, for example, African Americans, those without college degrees. And finally, that is we want to include all the age groups. That is, I also have a Spanish version for the old people who don't speak English. And also it's available for the caregivers. That is to include the people aged 70 and older, but who don't have the ability to answer the survey. So this just shows an example of the survey. That is the left is English, the right is Spanish. And I just jumped to the results, and this is an example of the bi-directional relationship between ICT and travel that is for the shopping activity. And I also did similar models for social and recreation as well as for health. For the sake of time, this is the conclusion when we get to the two questions. The first thing was the relationship. The relationship is that no matter what the travel purpose it is, ICT, daily travel, they are positively related to each other. So simply put, that is who travel less also use the technology less. So that's the double disadvantage to some extent. Among all the factors, that is the difficulty of using the internet is one of the strongest predictor. That is also something the urban planners need to know, that if we want to mitigate the transportation equity, the technology awareness and education, that is very important as well. And then which groups have the double disadvantages? So I don't find many, but African Americans, they have fewer shopping trips and less e-shopping usage. So I don't know the mechanism there, but that is the finding. However, people of color, they have more e-health usage, and in the meantime, more doctor visits. So that is something that is promising, right? So the e-health can just compensate to some way. So what's the implication for this is that we need to narrow down the digital divide in the meantime. When we think about the transportation equity, that is a new thing for the planning profession and transportation profession as well. But then the next thing I want to highlight is that we might want to think about the technology support beyond e-health. So why the e-health is so popular is because every institution, every federal institution, including Medicare, just support something related to e-health. Especially there is a surge during the pandemic for the older people. But if we want to get them have richer life experience, we want to really think a more holistic package of what older people really want and need. So what I conclude by this is that older people is only a case when we are in a hypermobility world, right? So there are many social groups who are disadvantaged in that. When we think about the interaction of transportation and health, we want to think about what can promote the social engagement and interactions of the disadvantaged people. And we really want to think of transportation and density from the land use perspective, what our cities and community look like, and also from the technology perspective. So those three aspects are also aligned with what we see, the accessibility, right? So that's the paradigm shift. So based on that, I also tried a step further and think about the research and theory implications for that, and developed something I call accessibility capability. So what it did is that just integrate the theories in accessibility, determinants of health, and in gerontology, that is a successful aging, and think about what factors are related to people's accessibility and what it means. There are a lot of implications of this theoretical framework and also the empirical research as well. But I would say the most important takeaway is that transportation is not enough, right? And we cannot think about old people as a whole. We need to think about the subgroups as well. And there are a lot of implications. For example, the equal vehicle access, that is very important, especially for the low-income older people. I also think about the alternative transportation modes, for example, the TNC, how the Uber can collaborate with the health industry to provide transportation solutions for older people. A volunteer driver program that is very promising, but unfortunately is very small scaled in most of the places in the United States. And also think about more trips beyond healthcare. And finally, don't forget land use and technology education. They are very important as well. DOT and HHS, they already started to collaborate each other on this and started to work with each other in the 2080s to just formulate coalition and just mitigate the transportation difficulties for old people. But unfortunately, we know the politics in federal agencies, right? It is slow, it is hard. So we will say it is an opportunity as well, especially we have Infrastructure Investment Job Act those days, and is to say how the different agencies, including HUD, AARP, how everyone can work with each other to promote the activities for older people. Yeah, so that's all for the presentation, and happy to take questions.
Quick question for you. When you were collecting your data for elderly people who did not have cars, was the question, do you have a car or do you drive a car? I ask that because you do have a lot of elderly and disabled people.
Mm-hmm.
They own a car.
Yeah.
And they have a family member drive them wherever the car gets
Yeah.
shared. And so, but they never drive the car because they physically can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I also get a lot of comments from the reviewers for that paper. That is a secondhand data, and U Michigan conducted that. What they asked is that how many cars you have.
Okay.
It's not whether you are an active driver or not, or whether you have license or not. So that's 3 different questions. But for this data set, that is the only question for the car ownership. But the situation behind that can be very different. Yeah, I acknowledge the limitation.
The numbers look worse, right? Because
yeah,
a lot of the people that maybe appear to be driving cars physically can't or choose not to, and instead have a family member that has access to a car.
Yes. Yes, so I'm also conducting another research right now, but that is also have the limitations. I'm using the NHTS data to see that if people do not have a car, what's the implications for the travel outcomes? But then I only can do the cross-sectional comparisons between different social groups, but did not see how that changed over the life course. Yeah, thanks for the question.
I'm wondering if you looked at safety data, because in the end, you know, under like the policy agenda, one of the mentions was getting them access, and that concerns me. It's anecdotal, but I have people in my own life who kept driving well beyond it was safe. And so I wonder if you've looked at sort of the likelihood of, with age, of getting into a crash, and whether that disincentivizes them from driving, how that impacts them, and how that impacts policy decisions as well.
Yeah, that's a good direction, but I did not look into in the dissertation, but I think that is a really important direction to go, especially to think about the old people living in the suburban areas, rural areas, right? The streets are not very safe in many situations, and how the street design or something like that influence the safety and how we can just improve that. But I did not look into that yet. Thank you.
I was wondering if you were planning to redo the same modeling that you did earlier with your same cohort because of COVID and the increase in retirements that happened during the pandemic and post-pandemic?
Yeah, that's a really good one. And in the survey, I did ask them what happened during the pandemic and what's the life cycle events they have experienced during the pandemic. But unfortunately, I did not find some interesting findings that is very different from the young people. So I did not include that in the discussion. But for the after pandemic, that could be difficult. That is something you need to trace back to who conducted the survey and ask them to do that again. So that could be a little bit tricky, but something I think is very promising to do is to think about to do another survey after the pandemic and ask what they did during the pandemic. Yeah.
We have some online questions.
Oh, good.
So somebody says, first they say, thank you for the inspired talk. And then for your second research, they're wondering for those who become zero vehicle households, how do their travel patterns change? So do they travel less, but they still travel by car? Do they change to other modes? And then also wondering if there's environmental factors that contribute to how they can live zero vehicle lifestyles. For example, is it possible that people in the suburbs who live without cars are those who have more social support, and are people in urban settings then just changing to walking and public transit?
Yeah, those are really good questions, but again, the data cannot really support what I do. So for the data, it really only includes two transportation questions. That is how many cars you have, and another question is that your transportation expenditure. So that is even more vague when it comes to the older people, because some public transit, they are free, right, to the older people. So in terms of that, a better data set could be the health and retirement study, also conducted by Michigan. But they have only one variable again, that is driving cessation. So that could be something that is the limitation of the data. But there is a recent study by the UCLA scholars, which is very interesting. What they found is that in the downtown areas, the older people tend to have the driving cessation earlier. So their explanation is that they have more alternative travel modes and they are more comfortable to do that. So I think if I have the better data, this is a good direction to go and think about what is really the transportation deserts for the old people and how we can move forward.
Wow. Now that he's done this explanation about how limited the data is, I'm not sure, but I'll ask it anyway. So when we think about healthy aging, like one of the ways to age healthfully is to just sort of outrun it, you know, like quite literally, like the more you move, the longer you stay healthy. And in promoting active transportation, having more ADA compliant facilities for walking and then access to transit is important. And do we see that these people are changing their routes to access better facilities? And then, you know, if the wayfinding is too complex, then they're like,
yeah, that's
gonna go.
Yeah, that's a good question. But I should acknowledge this is that these bunch of studies are conducted at the federal level. So what I really primarily look at is what, for example, a majority of the US communities look like. So even for the multimodal cities like Portland, there are a lot of the policymakers can do for the older people, right? And when we come to the policy perspective, is that in most of the context, that is people with disabilities and older people these two groups are under the same support system, right? And also at the local level, there is an area agency for aging, as well as the transit agencies. Sometimes they provide the overlap or the different transit programs for the old people. So that is a thing that is which older groups should we support, right? So the older people with the disabilities, that is one group of them. But my argument is mainly that we need to think more holistically, right? So even if they are healthy, maybe they have the income difficulties to maintain, to repair their cars or something like that. But yeah, that is I think a good direction to go. And maybe I think a big limitation of my research is a lack of the first-hand experience from the old people themselves. So this is what I plan to do, maybe to interview the old people in the communities or in the senior centers, and then to find the ways to promote the smaller scale transportation programs for them.
I don't know if you could speak to this, but what has been your experience with the US focused data versus the experiences in China, where cultures are more, we care about each other versus the individualism of America, where you're kind of on your own and you have your car and you travel versus relying on transit, relying on your community more?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in China, I would say the situation is very different. So most of the older people, I did not see any older people around me drive. Yeah, so my father did not drive until 40. So, and in China as well, I think it is a culture difference. And that is very interesting is that Chinese older people, many of them do not feel uncomfortable if they live with their children. So in many cases, it's their kids who give their rights or something like that, and there might be more intergenerational support for that. From the data perspective, it is hard. And as the United States, that is the data from China is also conducted by the sociologists or the economists. So when you look at the large scale data, like there is a Charles that is similar to the retirement survey in the United States, is that transportation is not a big part. They might ask how you go to the hospital, but yeah, that's not a big part of the survey itself.
Thanks.
Kind of piggybacking on that, I was wondering if you've ever looked at some of the demographics of the support system of aging populations, because I'm willing to venture a guess that from boomers to say Gen X, it's much more likely that their kids have moved away. And so if we have a lot more people coming into retirement age and these ages where they're gonna stop driving, if their kids are gone, who's there to drive them around? And I'm wondering if you've looked at that and like the shifting demographics of basically their kids, their younger support system that may have been driving them.
Yeah, this
Their parents.
is something I want to do, but it seems that because the social service like this is not organized in that way, sometimes it is very hard to do that. But the thing that I think PSID can do is that to select the same families and see that what's the residential pattern of the older people and what's the residential pattern of their children, because sometimes the older people move closer to their children, sometimes their children move closer to their parents. So that is something that I think is promising to say, and yeah, maybe that's not yeah, the data might be difficult, but that's very interesting to say how that can help. And another direction is the volunteer driver program. Is that how you build the trust and also the relationships within the community. So that, for example, the neighbors, friends can pick you up, drop you off. So that's a good direction as well. But there are some policy concerns, especially in terms of the vehicle insurance or something like that. Thank you.
Great. I think we are running out of time. So there's only great presentation and also many good questions, and then leave potentially a lot of future research.
Yeah.
Again, thanks, Alex.
Thank you.